as I was saying before, I've really wanted to chat to you for a while, but then I know on Twitter we're having this discussion, or you were sharing some thoughts which I found really interesting, just around the
Mm.
ideas of masculinity, the black community, the intersection between the two, and it was making me think a lot about. There's just so much around that as well, and I think even some aspects
Mm.
of that tie into things that I know that you've written about in your work in the past as well, and
Yeah.
also something I really wanted to touch on is just this idea of identity in general, because I think this really factors in to how we navigate society and how we navigate interactions with each other, whether that's in like relationships,
Yeah.
whether that's, it manifests in different ways.
Yeah.
But I guess to start with,
Absolutely.
you are a writer. For anyone that doesn't know you and hasn't come across your work, I mean, how did you get into writing, and how did you know? Because I think this is a two-part question and it's very important. One, like, when did you know that this is something you want to do? And then also, when did you realize that you were good
Mm.
at it? Because I think there's a lot of people that maybe they want to write or they enjoy writing, but knowing that you actually have a skill and
Yeah.
this is your craft. When was that for you?
Yeah. Okay, so to answer the last question first. So when did I know? I don't know, man. Like, I think it was when I signed with an agent when I was like, oh, I might be all right. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Just about.
just like even now, I'm like, honestly, even now, I'm like, I don't know, man. But when you've got someone else saying, "Oh, we want you to write this thing," or like, "Here, we'll pay you," you're like, "All right, shit, I must be good then. Let me do it." Innit? Like, sorry, I don't know if there's any swearing or not. I
Yeah.
kind of got really comfortable, so excuse my French.
Nah, be comfortable. Be comfortable. It's
Yeah.
fine.
But I think like when I first started writing, it was just enjoyment. I just really enjoyed it. I enjoyed going to open mic. Like I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed going to open mics, reading poems. Like I would literally do that like weekly when I first started out. Do you know what I mean? Different spaces, just go and listen, not just to read or
Mm,
whatever, but just to listen to other people. Like I even, obviously pre-lockdown, but even now, um, I still try and do that as much as I can. And I don't know if like that feeling of I have this philosophy of the moment that you think you're good, like you have to have a certain level of self confidence, right? Or self belief. But the moment that you think you're good, like is the moment that you start to relax and lose it, you know? Like, and so for me, I try
yeah.
not to think so much about how good I am or anything like that. I just think about, can I do it? Can I write this book? Can I write this poem? Can I, write this article, whatever it is? And then if I can, just to do that. But I don't really like to think of, oh, I'm good. I mean, we're human beings, so there definitely are moments where I've written something. I'm like, no, I'm a good writer. Like, I'm good, but
Yeah.
that's just the ego talking, and I try to stay away from that as much as possible. But yeah, to answer your first question, like how I got into writing was purely accidental. Like I just found for me that like my main thing was basketball, and then when that wasn't really a pathway anymore, I just needed something else to put my energy towards, and it just so helped that writing was something that I was able to do, and was also very therapeutic for me. Like it brought me into a new kind of space, meeting different people and all of that kind of stuff, and helped me to understand myself. And I just kind of kept going a bit further each time. Do you know what I mean? Like little writing here, then open mics there, then little like blog here. And it was all just random, like just, and then, Twitter kind of happened and I would just tweet random thoughts and whatever. And it all just kind of like snowballed. Even now it still feels like a snowballing kind of
Mm,
thing, just from one thing to another to another. But I'm very lucky now that to have reached a stage like in the last few years where it is a career for me. Um, but yeah, I
yeah.
can't ever say that I planned this route or predicted or was like, this is what I'm gonna do. And some people say like, yeah, in my head, this is what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna do it. I
Yeah.
manifested, bruv. Like,
Yeah.
okay, good for you. But me, I just enjoyed writing. I put my passion to it. And then I just followed, and then when the opportunities just came, like I aligned myself with what I thought I could do, and what felt true to
Mm,
my values and who I am. And so if those opportunities didn't come, would I still be writing? Yeah. Like I just wouldn't be, sharing with the world in the same way. So yeah.
I hear that. Do you feel like there was ever maybe a tipping point in when it was going from, okay, this is something I'm purely just doing because I love it, and this is you pouring
Mm.
yourself out into your work, and then now suddenly you have an audience that is receptive of and wants more of that work?
Mm. So I had a couple of so early on I self-published some books, right? And that was more just me trying to experiment, and people were like, oh, enjoying your work, can read anything, whatever. And I was like, you know what, let me just put something together and see um, if anyone will buy it. But like, A, it was mad expensive. B, I didn't make any money. Like I lost money. Do you know what I mean? Even think of time and labor costs and all of that.
Yeah.
Bro, like, mate, I don't know. I probably sold 100 self-published books. Like, do you know what I mean? It was not lucrative. Like it was not, never mind lucrative.
Okay.
I didn't even break even. But that wasn't the point. Like,
Yeah.
it was nice to have those connections and nice to have things on paper and so forth. But I think it was at maybe the point of, like I mentioned earlier, when I signed with my agent, but actually prior to that. So I was working in a job that I got really, really frustrated and basically made me incredibly miserable. And then I was just like, I had the opportunity to leave, right? And I basically planned to quit the job for about a year. And I was like, I need, like, this environment is depressing me. Like I'm just not able to be comfortable here, and be who I am and be true to myself and my values and all of this and the life that I want to live. But I don't know what's next, and so I need to find myself. And so I don't want to idealize this whole quit your job thing, because like it took me the whole year to save up a decent amount of money, but then also I was still living incredibly
Yeah.
broke for like the next year, two, maybe 2 3 years after that. Like, do you know what I mean? And I didn't have children and stuff like that, and I can move back to my parents, and like, and this is at like 30 years old and stuff. So like there were definitely sacrifices that I had to make, but I think it was at that point I was like, well, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I just really enjoy writing, right? I know that that makes me happy, so let me try that.
Mm,
And then if nothing comes of it, which is also fine, like at least I know that for that period of time I was like happy. um and then actually what was really interesting was when I had all this time to write, I was like, I don't know about this writing thing, I don't really like writing all the time.
yeah.
Like, I was like, right, every day from morning till night? I don't know, man. I don't know. Like,
Mm,
so I found that actually some people are all or nothing. They put all their energy into one thing and that's it. And sometimes that's what people expect. But actually, it's very good to also be into several things. So I thought, okay, I can kind of mix up my passions and be interested in different things, and I could still work a full time job, which I do now, and then write, and then do coaching and basketball and whatever, and just balance it up. But I think it was actually that basically me trying to find myself made me realize what I do love and how much I love it. And there's some very kind of purist
mm,
writers out there who say, oh, I breathe writing. And I'm like, bro, I don't breathe writing. I breathe air. Like, and I eat food. I don't eat writing. Like, and I
yeah.
love writing, but like, I also like to leave it alone. So yeah, I think in a roundabout way of answering your question, it was just kind of, yeah, I don't know, a general kind of approach, really, I guess.
It's an interesting point you make with having so much time to do the writing, because I mean I enjoy writing myself, and I've always written
Mm.
more so fiction. Like I think that's what I enjoy
Oh,
writing
cool.
more, and also reading. But I do
Yeah.
write nonfiction, like I write my newsletter, things like that. And
Hmm.
it's funny because I remember I've been trying to write literally for the last like 5 6 years, mostly just like
Mm.
fiction stuff. But And I think that's been a bit better, even though what I find hard is actually finishing the things that I start writing. But I remember there
hmm
was a
Yeah.
year where I was just not employed and I was just not doing anything. And I was like, boom, this is the year I'm gonna have so much time. I'm gonna get all this writing done. I'm gonna start and finish like a whole novel. I wrote almost nothing. It was so hard. Sitting down every day and actually like forcing yourself to try and write. I feel like that was really hard.
Yeah.
And the only time, so I do this
Yeah.
yearly thing. I think you might have heard of it called NaNoWriMo, National November Writing Month.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
you're insane.
yeah,
I find people who
yeah,
do that like what? Yeah, yeah.
but it's a
I've
way
tried
to
to do that.
force
I
you
just not.
to sit down because
Yeah.
otherwise, I mean, I'm getting better now. Particularly writing a newsletter that's weekly forces me into a regular habit of having to write every
hmm
day. So I think maybe I'm better equipped now. But I know before
hmm
it was just really hard.
hmm
You feel like you're creatively blocked because you can't just sit down and make yourself write and actually make the writing good. And I think maybe that's part of what the blocker
Yeah.
was, is
Yeah.
realizing that, you know what, maybe a lot of the writing is going to be rubbish. And then eventually, the more you write, then it will be better. But
Yeah.
yeah, the first time
Yeah.
I finished NaNoWriMo was actually when I went back to working full time. I was now working in a law firm. I had less time than I'd ever had
Mm-hmm.
before, but using the
Mm-hmm.
small scraps of time that I had, I think that was almost
Mm-hmm.
freeing in a way to being able to just like focus my creative energy on that
Mm-hmm.
writing.
Yeah, there's something, especially with like the working kind of full time or the 9 to 5 thing. Like some artists are like, oh no, I can't do it, whatever. Like I've tried to do the whole freelance artist thing. I don't enjoy it. Like I very much like that structure of like,
Mm,
like 9 to 5, and you have to be at the office or be at the desk or whatever, like at a certain time, and you clock off at a certain time, and that order and that routine and that structure. I just apply it to my writing. So I found that you know, what's the point of having like 10 hours of free time if I only spend 2 hours of that writing and the rest of the time I'm demotivated or I haven't got enough structure or whatever. So I could just, what I found was easier for me is like, I got the structure at 9 to 5. I wake up early in the morning, wake up at 6 or at 6:30, 7. I write for an hour, go about my day, whatever, come back, write for an hour in the evening. That's the same amount of time that I would have probably been
yeah.
like used for writing anyway. And I feel much better because I'm using my time effectively. So I really think especially in terms of writing, it's really just about breaking it down into small chunks and just trying to endure. And so, yeah, my kind of thing is just write 500 words a day, or between 250 to 500 words a day,
Mm.
and you'll be good. Like eventually you'll have something, and that's it.
Yeah, I love that. So one thing I really wanted to ask you was the extent to which, or at least how, you feel like your background influences your writing and your craft. Because I know
Mm,
obviously you have your debut novel, No Place to Call Home. You've now written Mask Off as well. And I know you had the three poetry collections before that. And I'm really interested
mm,
in, yeah, just how your background and who you are as a person influences your writing.
mm. I mean, I think it's a massive influence, being. And when I say background, like it's a kind of mm, multiplicity of identities. Like I don't just mean it
Mm,
in terms of my Congolese identity or African identity or Black identity. I It's a combination of those, yes, but also my own kind of intricate personal philosophical or spiritual beliefs as well. Like I think those things really influence me probably more than any other aspect of my identity. Do you know what I mean? And so for me, I take those things
mm,
really, really seriously. So I do think that in terms of writing, when I do write, I do kind of see it as a deeper sacrifice and a deeper privilege as well, considering that like I'm 2 generations removed from illiteracy. Like my grandparents were
mm,
illiterate. Like that's not that far away. And so being
yeah.
able to write for me, I think at this time, like, is a real kind of real privilege, and a real spiritual exercise because we're able to keep stories alive that, you know, had been erased or suppressed for so long. And so I really feel like a sense of purpose. So even if it's being read by everyone or if it's just for my own personal records or whatever it is, like I really think that the act of like writing is archiving to a certain degree as well. And so we're keeping stories, we're keeping our histories alive. And that's
Mm,
like so incredibly important to me. And all of that ties into like who I am and my background and my identity as well, you know?
yeah, that's really, really interesting. And I think it's a big question as well, what you were saying in terms of how your philosophical identity ties into maybe your cultural background as well. Because I think
Mm,
that's something I feel like a lot of young people, particularly using the UK as we're here as an example, where
mm,
people have this duality of either where they are from or where their parents are from, and being able
mhm,
to find like who you are within that, and then also having multiple intersections that come off from that. Maybe you're part of the LGBT community, maybe you're also a woman, maybe you're also, there's other aspects of that. And when you're looking historically, how does that all fit into you crafting who you are and how you understand your place in society? I really love what you were saying about identity and how there's this interplay between maybe your cultural identity and your philosophical identity and the ideas that you embrace and the ideas that you adapt. But also, I know that there's
mhm,
nuances there because some of that philosophy might differ where between if you embrace more of an African identity versus more of a Western
mhm.
identity, and
Oh,
that can
absolutely.
play out in different ways. And I know I actually have your book here. I promise it's funny because it wasn't a prop, because I brought it out so that I could look back over it because I've had it for a while. And
Yeah.
it's a really interesting book for me, and I think some of the topics it touched upon resonated with me in a very same way that um another book resonated with me, which is Half a Yellow Sun. And the reason being because
Wow.
obviously, like my parents, I don't know if you know, but I'm Nigerian, but I'm
Mhm,
Igbo and I'm from Asaba. And so me being here
mhm,
is largely because my parents slash grandparents came here, well, my grandparents during the Biafra War, and so obviously there's a whole
mhm,
story with that. But ironically, I mean, my dad went back later on, and then so I'm now kind of like, I'm still a first generation immigrant, but kind of second generation as well.
mm,
And I think one thing that I've always
mm,
struggled with, particularly earlier in my life, is deciding what identity and what part of this whole complex thing that you embrace. Because we had a civil war. The reason that we had the issues that
mm,
we had and me coming here is because obviously we were on the losing side of that civil war, where we were, saying that we're Biafran, and there's a massacre in my
mhm, mhm.
hometown. And when I look at the history, because obviously I
Mm,
wasn't there, but when I'm looking at the history, I'm seeing names of like relatives and people that have my name. And so then it's like,
mm,
okay, even
mhm,
when I'm saying I'm Nigerian, really, is it that I'm
mm.
Nigerian, or do I feel a stronger identity with maybe Biafra or being Ibra? And then beyond
Right.
that, now the next level is, now that I've come to the UK, now it's like, am
Mhm,
I British or am I still Nigerian? Because I wasn't even born here,
mm,
but I also recognize that,
mhm,
and I wonder if you could speak to this to an extent. But I've definitely, there's
mm.
privileges of being here. Me doing all the things that I'm doing, all the jobs that I've
Yeah,
had, me being able to run
absolutely.
businesses, me being able to do this. This has all come because I'm here. And I
Mhm,
know,
mhm,
particularly with black people, when you see people get some
mhm.
notoriety, there's always those people that are like, oh, you should be grateful to be here. You can't be talking about the UK like this and that. You can't be saying all these things. And one thing that
Yeah.
I've noticed for myself is the duality between, okay, I actually do recognize that. I have cousins that are in the village that have never even been to Lagos, let alone come into London. But at the same
Mhm,
time, the UK was
mhm.
also the people that were funding the civil war in my country, and I wouldn't even be here if you
Right.
guys weren't doing all of that. And so it's like you've
Yeah.
created the circumstances where I'm here
Exactly.
now. And yeah, I,
Exactly.
I wonder like how much of that resonates with you as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because a lot of it is politics of nationality, politics of, or border politics, politics of ethnicity, as well. And all of those at the same time are very important, but also very arbitrary. and always shifting. Like, and so
Mm.
I'll use my own example in terms of like Congo because that's the situation I come from. So we have Democratic Republic of Congo, but then we also have the Republic of Congo. So DR Congo, DRC, we were colonized by Belgium. Republic of Congo was colonized by France. The amount of times that there's like political clashes between the two or any kind of surrounding neighboring countries, all of the borders are drawn up by colonialism. Like, and so my thing is like,
Yeah.
if I show national pride, right, in terms of being Congolese, especially towards or against my other African brothers and sisters, that's also reinforcing the same colonial like oppression that was imposed on us. Like, do you know what I mean? Because how proudly Congolese can
Mm.
I really be before it borders into essentially Euro patriarchal submission? Like saying, yes, these guys made us who we are. So at the same time, I feel Congolese, but then also at the same time, I'm like, nah, I don't agree with these borders. Um, and it's the same time I feel like with ethnicity because it's like it's important to recognize my ancestral lineage and to uphold that. But at the same time, for me, I don't. We often tend to create hierarchies based on power and influence in politics, and those are also reinforcing the same boundaries and hierarchies that are imposed on us. Because if I, as a Congo, so there's four main ethnic groups in Congo. The Bangala or the Swahili, the Muluba, and the Kikongo. So if and each has their own version of whichever hierarchy goes at the top or at the bottom, and everyone always thinks it's their own, right? Which is like, come on. Um,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like in that country, in our country, if we are buying into that, then we're also buying into the racial hierarchies that puts the white man, quote unquote, at the top of all of that, right? And so my thing is like we have to like we have to be really careful on what we buy into and what we believe to be true and look at things through a critical and historical lens. And I where conflict and war and trauma is involved as well. I think it's really really important for people to try to have a compassionate view and something that takes all things into consideration and moves accordingly. Because obviously, for yourself as an Igbo man and a descendant of the legacies of like the Biafra War, someone saying to you that your ethnicity isn't important is essentially erasure, right? And so when you've gone through that history of erasure,
Mm.
it's really important to hold on to that. But then at the same time, it's like, to what extent do we hold on to something, and then can it spill over into reinforcing another hierarchy? And those are sometimes things that are beyond our personal control, or beyond our familial control. And I say all of that to say this: it's hella complicated. you know, like, do I have the answer?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can only go with how I feel. And so to bring that back to the book, like No Place to Call Home, I'm looking at it like, okay, now we add the nuance of being, first generation, second generation children in the diaspora in the UK, in the US, in France, wherever, countries that essentially don't want us to be there, where we're the burdens of that country for whatever reasons, although they exploit our countries. Like, to what extent can we claim this land as ours? When we're not at home here. And so I feel very lucky in that
Mm.
aspect because it's like I wasn't really brought up to claim the UK. Like, I don't consider myself British. Um, I've never self-identified as British. I call myself I'm a black Londoner. Like, and if I move to Manchester, I'll be a
Okay.
black Mancunian. Like, I'm my race and my locality type of thing. If that makes sense. The only time I claim kind of British
Yeah.
is when my passport is. Do you know what I mean? It's like when I'm on the border and I'm
Yeah.
trying to stay here, like. But other than that, I have no claims to the state. And I say the same, in Congo, like in terms of the state. How can I say that the Congolese state represents me when our leaders have been pillaging the country for billions, squandering wealth, and leaving everyone in like abject poverty? How can I say that that's my country? That's not
Mm,
something to be proud in. And so, yeah, I mean, it's all very nuanced and complicated, man. But I do think that you have to make your own decision. I can't speak of, I can't speak for and like on behalf of anyone else, but I do think that you have to make your own decision that's comfortable for you, and that it aligns with your legacy and with your identities, and it's actually like informed, man, because it's complicated. Like this country doesn't love us. 5 years ago, like back in the day, it's mad. Like 5 years ago, I used to say to people, "I'm not from Britain." Like especially when this book came out. Sorry, I'm going on a little bit, but when this book came out,
mm.
people would introduce
No,
me
go on.
as like the black British author, and I would interrupt them and be like, oh, "I'm not British." Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and I would that would like
Yeah.
I was really like insistent on that, and that would kind of make people feel uncomfortable. Like, no, but you are British, but no, I'm not British. I speak English, and that's because of colonialism. I speak French, that's because of colonialism, and I'm here in the UK, like, and that's because of colonialism. Like, do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't, it's a difficult, it's a nuanced conversation, not even necessarily difficult, but nuanced. And so this whole idea of like no place to call home is just about how like the placelessness of this thing of belonging and identity and how it's ever shifting, really.
Yeah. There's so many things that you said that I resonate with completely. And it's a
Mm,
really interesting. It's hard. And maybe this ties into the next part because, like you say, I think the times when I choose to embrace the Britishness is now when it's going to benefit me and I'm going to get something out of it. And I
mm-hmm,
think that's a really interesting tie to obviously you have a second book now, which is Musk Off. And I know on Twitter we were having this conversation about how I think you were saying you have a lot of these discussions about masculinity, particularly when it's within the black community and it's mostly women that turn up, or
mm-hmm,
maybe black men are not
mm-hmm,
um, interacting with a lot of that material in the same way. And we can unpack that, we can get into that. But the one part that I was thinking about connecting is the fact that I think part of it is as black people, we are not the dominant people in this society, being here in the
mm-hmm,
UK in the West. But
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
when it comes to patriarchy and when it comes to, other mechanisms within society, there are things that we do benefit from.
mm-hmm,
And I do think that there's an extent to
mm-hmm,
which sometimes we claim the bits that benefit us. So when it's about race, oh, we're all subjugated equally. Let's all fight together. We're all on the same place. But then sometimes,
mm-hmm.
at least from what I see, when it comes to gender, it's now like, oh, let's let's do this a bit differently. There's
Yeah,
if it's gonna benefit me, my ears perk up. I'm gonna be interested. If it's not benefiting me, I'm just gonna sit here.
yeah,
You
yeah,
guys
yeah.
go do your thing. I'll support you from the back. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic as well.
I mean, it just goes to show, really, like when we speak about social justice, the fact is most people are interested in the social justice issue that most affects them, right? And I'm not saying whether that's
Mm,
right or wrong. It's understandable because if you have disability issues and that's the dominant factor in how you engage with society, then it's your prerogative to be concerned about making a change for that, right? And so if you think about in terms of race, in terms of gender, whatever it is, and so as black men, we sit at that intersection of being privileged in terms of our gender as men, but being oppressed in terms of our race as black people. And so,
mm,
the old adage that says like, if you're in a position of privilege, equality can feel like oppression. And so the same reservation or fear that white people have about racial equality is the same fear or reservation that we men have, we particularly straight men have, um, about gender equality because we feel like it's gonna attack us. You know, we feel like it's going to remove us from the perceived privileges that we're supposed to have. But the thing that's different about gender equality is it's a double-edged sword, and it's even funny, right? Because to a certain degree, like even racial inequality is as well. Because inequality doesn't benefit the majority of white people in the way that they think it benefits them. You know, like Trump becoming
Mm.
president made the average white American a lot poorer than when Obama was president.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the past 10 years of a conservative government in the UK has systematically robbed like white English people of any kind of like security and wealth and so forth that even like they had prior to it. And they're blaming this stuff on immigration, but really it's, you know, you're supposedly like it's your government, you know, and this government is supposed to be for you, but they're not. And so this is the thing with us now. It's like, okay, we have to be concerned about black issues, and I think as men, like our primary issues are black male issues, right? Our issues in terms of like our racial equality, because that's the thing that most affects us. But if we look about it, if we think about it in terms of gender, also there's many things that affects us in terms of like our gender discrimination. Now it's about whether or not we are aware of those things that affect us. Like if we look at hypermasculinity and aggression and representation of black men in the mainstream media or in sports in terms of like how black men are sexualized. Like we don't talk about the sexualization of black men. And I say this is something that I'm just like, wow, you know,
Mm.
I've never seen a conversation because like I really it been had on Twitter because you look at the images of black men that are shared, and it's always these topless oily dons, like you know, who go gym 24/7 and whatever, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, hmm. And then whenever they're talking about a certain type of black man, the Daniel Kaluuyas, the you know, the John Boyegas and so forth, I'm hearing language like, ah, did someone say train, choo choo, like all of this kind of stuff. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and John Boyega
Mm.
or Daniel Craig aren't even don't even sexualize themselves. They're not even like that way. They don't even come across that way. Do you know what I mean? They don't have any references to that.
Yeah.
So the fact that that's what your reference point is for showing appreciation towards black men, you know, it says a lot about the way that society sexualizes black men and we normalize that sexualization. But also, it says a lot about us as black men and what we accept. Do you know what I mean? Because as men, you know, we think any kind of male
Mm.
attention is good, and so we feel validated by if someone finds us. Women are supposed to find you sexy, and it's a status booster, right? But at the same time, we don't really recognize when we're being sexualized because we see that sexualization to our benefit because the ultimate goal is sex, right? So we actually think we're the ones in power, but we're being disempowered, if that makes sense. But then it's like certain guys will
Mm.
be like, yeah, but who cares if I get to have sex? And I'm like, bro, like the bigger thing is your humanity. Like you're not a walking dildo. Like does someone actually care about you? You know, because that's what is actually at the core of it. And you know, it's difficult to allow someone to really care about you when you don't really care about yourself, you know. And I think about like
Mm.
how for as black men, how since what ages, since the such young ages, we've been sexualized into violence and aggression. Do you know what I mean? Whether it's like the Mandingo effect and all of that, like it's been happening for years. So as an adult, you step into it and you think it's your own agency, but you're actually just reinforcing a pre-ascribed role of what society thinks you should do and how you should be. And it's not something that's really interrogated. Like, and and I say this as like I like to use the example of Russell Wilson and Future as an example, right? In terms of like the binary and the contradictions, and also just like the sheer ridiculousness of it all, right? So you put Future there, you know,
Mm.
toxic man, multiple uh, children by multiple women, like he's rich, materialistic, drug habits, all of this absolute madness. You put, and he's very unathletic, let's say, right? In comparison to the person who I'm going to mention, which is Russell
Yeah.
Wilson, right? Who's literally a pro athlete. He's like 6'5", 250 pounds. Like he can bench press, all of this kind of stuff. But he loves his wife, Ciara. He's a wonderful father to adopt his son. Like he's, a deeply grounded person who has values and so forth. And between them two, Future is seen as being like the example of what a man should be, and Russell Wilson is seen as being
Mm.
like, oh, a simp or weak. Especially when people say Russell Wilson is weak, I'm like, bro, he's 6'5", like he will literally bench press you. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So these, and we got to think about what kind of examples that we've been given as black people in our communities, right? And whether or not it advances us or it takes us, it helps to actually develop us as a people, or whether it's like reinforcing stigma or stereotype, And there's only
Yeah.
so much you can reclaim. Like I don't really think you can reclaim certain stereotypes, or you can reclaim certain, whether it's like behaviors or stigmas, without the power to self-determine. Like, do you know what I mean? I can, like, let's say like the example of the N word. Like, I can reclaim the N word and call my boys it all the time, like, and it has a different meaning, and say that I've reclaimed it. But unless I have systematic privilege to be able to change how my destiny moves
Mm.
forward and self determine, like whether or not certain things influence whether I get a job or not, or what kind of economic kind of status I have, that reclamation doesn't really mean anything. Do you know what I mean? And so I
Mm.
think like the
Yeah.
psychology of all, like, what are we really trying to do? It's that, like, so I'm rambling now, but like it's kind of like the whole Kanye, like, Kanye West is a brilliant example of this. When he first raps about, we're trying to buy back our 40 acres, all right? So this whole materialism thing, and we're just trying to be seen as human and trying to self-determine and so forth. And then he goes on his mad example to reach like this apex of wealth with this family that's like, you know, basically whiteness on steroids, right? And he and look where it gets him. Like, even the
Mm.
economic wealth that we're all kind of like seem to be fighting for doesn't liberate you in the way that you think it does. It's about that collective power and that collective self-determination. And so I really just think that we have to have a bit more of a critical approach about, well, what stigmas, what stereotypes, what things are we trying to reclaim, what behaviors, what are we doing, and is it really liberating us, or is it really taking, or is it actually taking away from us and who we are? And a lot of people don't ask that question of themselves. They just think like, what can I do for me? It's almost like a really selfish approach.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, man, I don't know. I feel this conversation, man. I swear, I've gone into a conversation for a long time. I really want to write a book
Yeah.
specifically on Black masculinity, but there's some um, there's some more books coming out by other writers on that issue, that I've been told
Okay.
about. So hopefully, we'll get to open up like a conversation a bit
Okay, sweet. I have so many questions from everything you just said.
more.
I'll try and break it down. But maybe, okay, on the black masculinity point, what you pointed out with the Future and Russell Wilson thing, I think is so interesting, because particularly when you take it back to what you were saying about like the Mandingo effect and the hypersexualization of black men, it's so interesting that Russell Wilson as an archetype,
Hmm.
personality aside, in terms of his body, in terms of his height, in terms of all of those other things,
Right.
in any other context, he would be the one that people would be looking at. He would be the bigger example
Right.
of, wow, look at this black man. He's so strong. He's this, he's that. He's a supreme
Hmm.
athlete, one of the best athletes in the world, does all of this stuff. What do you think it is about
Right.
that particular situation that then makes people say, oh, no, he's weak? Because
Mm.
it's hard for me to think of what else he's done apart from love his wife and take care of his family, and like he hasn't come out and done anything weird. He's just a family
Mm.
man, and he doesn't even have much of a social media
Mhm.
personality outside of that. It's his wife posting stuff. He just
Mhm.
happens to be
Mhm.
around. And so I
Mhm.
find it really interesting how
Mhm.
someone that externally would be someone that you would think people look to and see as an icon, as someone that you'd want to be like, as someone you'd want to emulate. When they
Mm,
exhibit some of these attributes, now he's the weak one. The other guy, I'm not
mm-hmm,
even
hmm
exactly sure how tall Future is, but he's not running around bench pressing, throwing, Hail Mary passes. He's not doing any of those things. But now
hmm
he's the one that
hmm
is looked at as iconic when he has like 7 kids by 6 different women and is not around any of them. And I'm not saying that obviously he makes music, which is cool, but I struggle to think of like what else is there apart from this imbalance that makes this something to emulate and this something that's seen as weak.
And I really think like the issue also like we have if we look at the past 20, 30 years um and the direction that society has gone in, like capitalism and materialism and individualism has skyrocketed, right? So the behaviors and traits that are seen as being like inherently of those things are now normalized, right? And to the point, not even normalized, but glorified even. Um, Prior to that, you almost like it was still a patriarchal society, but there was almost this kind of like faux nobility to it, like in the sense of like you had men like, you were seen as a real man if you took care of your family, and all of those kind of things. Like you're noble in that sense, even though like a lot of these guys were still doing dirt anyway,
Mhm.
but like on the surface, that was the image that they
Yeah,
wanted to present, right?
yeah,
And now, like, even that presentation of taking care of your family and so forth, is not even seen as being a real man. Like, it's like who has the most money, who has, and not even the most money, but who. See, this is the difference. Is what you do with your money. Like, are you materialistic? Are you flashy and so forth? Because
mhm.
listen, Russell Wilson makes as much money as Future, if not more. Like I know them NFL players are paid,
Yeah,
like
probably
you
more.
know what I mean, and he's going to be paid for a long time. So you can't even make those comparisons. But it's about what they do with their money and the way that they carry themselves. And it's insane, like because it reinforces these materialistic values and stuff. And what you have is you have like that kind of materialistic representation, the future esque type of person has an impact on the younger generation. So many of them, so many young people, teenagers, Gen Z, whatever you want to call them, now see someone like Future as the person to aspire to. Will see that lifestyle as the lifestyle to
Mhm.
aspire to. And what you're gonna get, which also is something that I feel like there's a conversation that's to be had. This idea of like prolonged adolescence, is something I really want to explore more. In that the way that these lifestyles are pushing us towards, it's actually infantilizing us. So keeping us in a state of like
Mhm.
basic repetitive cycles where we live to only satisfy our most immediate basic urges of whether it's sex or meaningless casual relationships or just spending money on frivolous things or frivolous lifestyles that actually don't build us, don't transcend us from one stage to another, to another, to another. Do you know what I mean? And this is the thing, right? Pandemic was really, really interesting because so the amount of tweets that I saw where everyone was like, I have no more talking stages in me left, right? Next person, meet me at
Yeah.
the altar. Like, and I get it. And I get it, right? Because we really want that intimacy. And then and it's good, it's natural to. We're human beings, that we crave it. And that's fine. I do as well, right? And so to see that
Mhm.
and then contrast that with the first kind of tweets when there was a news of things opening up again, June 21st, everyone's like, I belong to the streets. Like, hold on. You were just
Yeah.
saying that you're ready for the altar. Like, what's going on? So I think people don't
Mhm.
really like actually critically think about what they're. processes are, like what's actually influencing them internally. And I feel like there's a lot of internal conflicts between us wanting to live a unburdened life, and whether that's in terms of like material wealth or whether that's in terms of like relationships or responsibilities, but us also wanting to be cared for. Like those things are in conflict. And if we look at the system that we live in terms of like it being a capitalist materialist system, being cared for and caring for someone is at odds with that. So in a capitalist system, relationships become reduced to basic transactions, transactions of the body and transactions of wealth, and sex, and that's it, really. So it's like, okay, 19 years old, cool. Early 20s, all right, cool. Mid 20s, it's kind of pushing on. 30s, you're like, "Hey, how sustainable is this lifestyle, bro? Like, you got a bad back and knees and you're still trying to bust down the club every night. Like, I don't know, 30, 35, 40,
Mm.
how sustainable is this?" And you know what? Just to kind of add a little story to that, yeah? Like, I remember one time, and this was what really made me check myself, and think, like, who do I want to be? When a few years back, out with some friends or whatever, and one of my friends had invited one of his guys. This guy came down, one of them guys who was always on the hype. Yeah, like Friday night, we're trying to hit the town. Yeah, yeah, hard working week. Yeah, let's go. Where the girls? We want to bring me some girls. And we're like, all right, cool, but bro, calm down. Like, them guys were just a bit too on it. Like, and then you're like, yeah, like,
Yeah.
there's girls, but like, relax. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and so I remember we were going out, we were kind of bar hopping, and then we went to one bar and they asked us for our IDs, etc. Just as they do. And he went in front of me, and he pulled out his ID, and he was like early 40s, like, and I was like, huh? Like, and I think like I was like 25 at the time, and I was like, early 40s,
Yeah.
and you're talking about where the girls are, this gash, this, and I'm like, bro, I don't know, man. Do you know what I mean? I felt really uncomfortable because I was like,
Mm.
is that what you really want? Or are you still repeating a certain toxic behavior that allows you to live in a certain way that's callous but also comfortable? So you don't really have to explore the discomfort of what does it mean
Mm.
to feel alone and to not be able to build the intimacy that you're looking for in your life, and to actually be frustrated about that, and to actually like go on a date and say, look, I'm looking for intimacy. Like, if this isn't it, like, I don't want to be here. Rather than the, oh, I'm gonna go for sex. Do you know the amount of guys that I know who've gone like, yeah, I'm sex, 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 whatever, yeah, whatever, and then to the girls are like, well, I just miss you so much. Like, I just want, and I'm, bro, like, let's be real. We all
Yeah.
know, we know the game, and this is the thing that I'm saying. It's like, we know the game, guys. We know the game, fellas. Like, we know the game. Do you know what I mean? Let's be honest. Let's actually be honest. Let's stop fronting with this whole toxic masculinity thing, whatever. Like, we're old enough. When you're 19, cool. I mean, it's not cool, but like, we get it. You're still learning life, whatever. But really, as we get older, like, we know the game. So what is it that's still forcing us to keep this facade, even though it's not beneficial to us, even though we're at a stage of life where we should have outgrown it, And if you look at someone like Future, how old is
Mm.
Future even? He's like 41 now.
Yeah.
Like, bro, man, like,
He's a lot older than Russell Wilson as well, actually.
right? Exactly. Russell Wilson's like early 30s. So I'm like, bro, Future, please, man. Like, she belonged to the streets. No, you belong to the chiropractor. Sort out your back. Sit down, bro. Like, read a book on a Sunday morning. Like, it's
Mm.
all right. You don't need to be at the strip club at 4 a.m. Spend time with your grandma. That type of stuff. Like, it's okay. And I think, like, yeah, we don't
Yeah.
get to see examples of that. Like, think about, we get to see so much of the toxic examples. What do we see, especially in terms of like black men and older black men as well? How many examples of older black men do we get to see them just living ordinary lives, right? Where they're taking care of their families, or they're with their families, spending time with their grandparents, spending time with their children. spending time with their aunties and their mother, or whatever it is, like building those relationships. We don't get to see it. The only context we get to see black men in is when they're making money, being materialistic, or being sexualized. And that doesn't get spoken about
Mm.
enough, you know? Sorry, I went on some wild tangent, man.
So how do we? Oh, no, no, no. I loved it, man. I loved every second. But it makes me think, like, how do we come out of this stage then? Because I know, going back to what you were saying about how we have these ideals, right? We have these ideals of maybe whether it's sex is involved or whether relationships are involved, but also money. And then you were talking about
Hmm.
capitalism, and we were looking at Kanye and how when he's younger, Kanye, he's talking about, oh, he wants to get this so that he can do this and he can have this impact in his community, all of these
Hmm.
positive externalities that can happen. And then he gets there. And when I say he gets there, he was at the top of everything, and
Hmm.
none of these things come about. And he almost becomes a replica of everything else that we've seen. And so when you
Mm.
talk about even how we use the N word as an example, and how we reclaim our power and how we can reclaim our agency as something separate from what is coming top down from society, and what, whether it's the
Mm.
hypersexualization of black men or whether it's expectations that are put on us, like how do we reclaim agency
Hmm.
from that? And then when we were talking about future just now as well, I'm also thinking about how, like you say, to an extent, how much of this is just us acting out the roles that have been given to us, and us acting out what we've been
Mm.
told this is what masculinity should look like. This is what you as a black man, this is
Hmm.
what you should be doing or having, and this is what you should be acting out. And so people look to out those
Mm.
things. And then even when you were talking
Hmm.
about representation, I was also thinking about how it's not like those people don't exist. You know, there are black men that are going out and just living their lives
Right.
and doing all of those things and living very different lives, but attention is not put on them.
Hmm.
And that is a mixture of things. One, it
Right.
might not be from media,
Hmm.
where if it's not profitable to show those other kind of examples. But I also
Hmm.
wonder, even on a societal level, because I see these discussions happen on Twitter where, you know, it's us chastising Russell Wilson. It's not anybody else. It's not the media telling us to hate him.
This is what
Outside
I'm
of our
saying.
community on Black Twitter, I don't even think people understand that there's this dichotomy here. Like, it's us that are saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is not good. We only care about this. If you want to have a conversation about that, we don't care. We only want to talk about this. Let's talk about."
Hmm.
So how do we get out of this cycle? Because it does seem like a cycle. Because,
Man.
like, it's something that we are definitely reinforcing, and then we will complain when other people from other demographics see us doing those things, and then they copy it. But really, I mean,
Right.
and
My,
then because they copy it and they show it to us, then we have to keep acting out those same things.
right. Bro, man. See, like in sociological theory, there's a thing called self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm sure, like you're aware of it, and but not a lot of people are, kind of thing. But it's like whatever representation. Firstly, if a group of people aren't represented or don't get to see themselves, that creates also links of like psychological low self-esteem, or kind of it shapes negatively shapes our worldview, and so we know that lack of representation as black
Mm,
people can negatively impact us, along as the fact as alongside the fact that we are, you know, perpetrated and stigmatized according to like systemic racism, right? And so if you look at that, but then also self-fulfilling prophecy, in that if you give someone a stereotype image of themselves and you continue to bombard it, eventually either that person or a core group of those people will start to behave in the way that replicates that. And so I think one of the things that happens with us as a
mm,
community is we are too focused on the here and now. We're too focused on what we're experiencing at this present time rather than it being a continuation of XYZ, right? And so what we're living through is a continuation of the legacies of slavery and colonialism. This sexualization and this materialism has been something that has been stigmatized upon us, but has been going on for the past 500 years. And so that future, the dichotomy of like Future versus Russell Wilson, you know, there were other dichotomies back in the day and so forth that represented those symbols, right? Like if you look at, the 80s and so forth, and some of the, like, some, like, if you look at who was being put in the mainstream or who represented our communities in the 80s, right? Alongside the black exploitation type of displays, you know, that was what was going on in the mainstream media representation. But in our communities, people were looking more so, or trying to look more so, to the likes of like Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, etc., or like the Thomas Sankaras, if we're going to focus it on our communities back home and stuff, the Patrice Lumumbas, etc., to give those community examples. All right, we're in the mainstream, they're not showing us the way that we are, we're not going to listen to them. We're not going to invest in them. But let's focus on our own. And I think now more than ever, our black culture. See, it's really interesting, right? Because in the 80s, 90s, etc., our black culture was systemically, like, essentially exiled or blocked from being represented in the
Mm.
mainstream. Imagine Michael Jackson's, like, his videos had, like, they there had to be a campaign for him to be shown on MTV. Like, they would not show it because of his race. Now black culture forms such a foundation of mainstream entertainment that we are like deeply embedded in it. And so it's like, but we have no control over what kind of representation, really, so we're continuously begging to be shown a certain way and begging to be invested, but then we're also doubling down on these forms of like stigma that essentially fuels this whole self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That essentially touches into like the basic carnal desires of like capitalism and materialism and stuff. And it shows that materialism as entertainment and the everyday life that we all live as boring, right? And we're just constantly trying to escape it.
Mm.
And so I think a lot of people, we have to really like be educated and question ourselves in terms of like, okay, the representation that I'm seeing and that I want, like, what is it? What am I actually putting out there? And I say this in terms of men as well. Like, what do I want in terms of like how I represent myself and the way that I behave in my community, but also the kind of women that I'm interested in. So Jasmine Sullivan, bad artist, right? And I'm making a lot of American references here because we don't realize the extent to which American cultural imperialism influences us, like shapes us. Do you know what I mean? Even as a black
Mm.
community here in the UK, and obviously we have a lot more diverse influences: Nigeria, the Caribbean, Nigeria and West Africa, and Central Africa and the Caribbean and so forth. But overwhelmingly, like, we don't talk about how much Black America influences us. And so, like, Jasmine Sullivan, she's got a new song out, and it's she talks about in that song about no longer wanting to be a good girl because she sees all the strippers are winning and all of this kind of stuff and whatever, and this whole good girl stripper dichotomy and stuff. And and if you look at that and you combine that with um, you know the rising rates of like BBL plastic surgery, even though there's like serious health risks towards it, right?
Mm.
All of these things are actually things that are fueling and reinforcing certain stigmas and stereotypes that are legacies of colonialism. Sarah Bartman of South Africa being paraded around Europe for her backside, essentially. And now, 2, 3, 4 generations later,
Mm.
we are having surgeries on ourselves. Mandingo being paraded around for his giant penis.
Yeah.
Now you're seeing young black men who essentially parade, like, a lot of young black men parade themselves around. Look at the, in terms of like either with his sleeping around, the
Mm.
sexualization or self-sexualization. But the difference is that for young black men, that's seen as living up to being masculine, and so that's why we
Yeah.
almost like reinforce it. And so for me, I always say like, okay, like, what are we reinforcing? Like, whatever we buy into, is it what the system has placed on us, or is it our own actual like cultures and our own actual, beliefs and so forth? And I find that, like, for a lot of the time when I'm having these conversations about with people about their choices and about self determination, a lot of the times, like that nuance of conversation of knowing that, oh, but did you know this ties into like a historical representation of the way that like we were subjugated against for a long time. A lot of people don't know that, you know. And so if you're looking at it now from the outside in, and I'm not saying I do stuff to like, I don't care what other races think of us, you know, like you've not liked us for
Yeah.
500 years. Like I don't think if you didn't like us for 500 years, you're probably not going to like us in my lifetime. Like that's not my responsibility. You know what I mean? Um, but I think it's very interesting that when we have the opportunity to look outside in and we have a mirror held up to us, that discomfort becomes a lot more real, you know? And I don't know, it's something, it's a real conversation that we need to have amongst ourselves. But places like Twitter seems to be the only platform for it. And there's just not enough nuance. Like it's about popular voices, it's about retweets, it's about, you know, hashtags and not really about
Mm.
listening. It's about the person who can get the best, you know, the best catchy response and make the other person look silly, not actually like learn from each other and grow together and so forth. And I've been on Twitter for 10 years, bro. Like 10 years. From my 20s, now I'm in my 30s. Bro, I'm tired. Like, I'm still seeing people talking about the same Star Wars and all of this. Bro, you're 21 now, you're
Yeah,
31.
it's the same
It's
conversations.
the same conversation. How? How?
Mm.
And then, you know what humbles me? I say to myself, every time I think about, you know, because it's like shallow entertainment, in it. Every time I think about joining these, you know, in these debates more and more, I think, what was my dad doing at my age? And I humble myself real quick. I just get back to the work that I need to be doing, boy. Do you know what I mean? Because when my dad was my age, he
Yeah.
was moving across continents trying to build a better future for his children and provide, you know? Like, and I'm able to do what I
Mm.
do now because he was making that sacrifice. So I'm like, yo, but what am I doing? Because this arguing stuff online, the past 10 years, this is what we've been doing, and no one's gotten anywhere. No one's listening to each other more. Do you know what I mean? We
Mm.
haven't. There hasn't been an agreed consensus. People are still arguing and doing the same thing. So, what kind of progress are we
Yeah.
really trying to make? And I don't think we get the chance to really have that self critique and self analysis and be like, actually, let's hold up a mirror to ourselves as individuals, but also as a community, and say that this is what we need to do better, rather than waiting for some outside person to come in and then get angry when they say something. Because you know what? I'm not gonna lie to you, bro. Sorry. You know what? Yeah, I should stop apologizing because one thing you should know is like if you get a writer, we'll tell mad stories in it. We got mad stories there, so I'll tell this one
Nah, I'm here for
story.
the
Like
stories.
I'll tell this one story. Yeah,
All
then
right.
this is like on fam. I was about 15 years old when this happened, and I was like, I will never let a white man tell me about my culture ever again. So, um, this was yeah. I was a teenager, and so Congo, my country Congo, had changed the name from Zaire to Democratic Republic of Congo. Right? I didn't know. I wasn't politically aware. And we was just like, this is just like the basketball courts or whatever. We'd hang out, there'll be people, we'll talk, whatever. There was this white guy there, some conversation came into politics, whatever, whatever. And then he's like, Carl, where you from? And everyone was there, like, and he's like, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm from Zaire. And he's like, Zaire, you sure? And I'm like, yeah. I was like, yeah, I'm from Zaire. He's like, Zaire, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, you sure? Zaire? And I said, and then he basically educated me and said, no, it's the Democratic Republic of Congo. Like, you know, when was your Independence Day? I didn't know. Political leaders, I didn't know. This guy was telling me bad stuff from Ben. I was like, ha, fam, nah. That hit me hard, you know? And I thought,
Mm.
that was a real wake up call. Do you know what I mean? Because you can't call yourself liberated. You can't be self determined. You can't be a free people if someone else knows you and your history and your culture more than you do. And if you know more about someone else's
Mm.
culture and history than you know about your own culture and your own history. Do you know what I mean? And that day humbled me. I was like, never again. Fool me once, Premier Gao, innit? You know that Premier Gao song, yeah? It's fool me once, shame on
Yeah.
you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So that was the one time that that happened. I'm never allowed that to happen again. You know, and I think we have to have a wake up call as a
Mm,
community and be like, okay, so you know, I say slavery and colonialism was fool me once, right? Cool, all right, we got. Like that's history. We can't change that. What are we doing now to avoid the fool me twice? And if you look at what's happening, we're kind of walking into the whole fool me twice situation, really. So
yeah.
you know, it's on
Mm.
us. But yeah, that's just bare
That's crazy.
hyper
You
bold,
said so
man.
much, man. I think. No, I love it. I think people are going to get so much from this, and I still have questions. I'm going to let you go soon because I know I've kept you
No,
long
I'm
enough.
good,
But
man. We're good. It's been
two
fun.
questions that I did have, and I wonder. So one is okay, from what you were just saying, and then also going back to what we were talking about in terms of the masculinity, but also like just relationship stuff in general. Okay, just from what you were saying now, I wonder how much this colonialism thing also has to play in that we need to understand our history.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the issue, I think, in the UK is one in the present, I know, and two is in the past. In the present, what do you learn about Black history in the UK? We're learning about Martin Luther King. That's not even
Mm-hmm.
our history. All the stuff that happened in the 80s in the UK, all the stuff that happened in the 70s in the UK, Windrush, all of these things happen right here, and you don't really know about them until literally when you're in university and you actually have to start having conversations with people and you hear this stuff from this person's auntie and then you hear this stuff from this person over here and you're piecing it together
Mm-hmm.
because you're not taught any of that. And so one is
Mm-hmm.
like, how do we have those discussions now based on the fact that we're not given much of this education, but then also when we look back, so much of our history and culture has been destroyed and is continually eroded. As an example, I'm Igbo. Do I
Mm-hmm.
even speak Igbo? As much as I was talking about Biafra and this
Mm-hmm.
and that, how much of my own language can I
Mm-hmm.
speak? But obviously, part of that, the reason
Mm-hmm.
I've always spoken English, even in the village in Nigeria, whether it's in Lagos, whether it's in the UK, is because of colonialism. And it's a really
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing when even for Africans, there's a lot that's being forgotten of what happened in the past. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that is because maybe we've lost libraries, we've lost cultural heritage. You have Ghana, you have a lot of African countries that are still trying to get their artifacts and important, like,
Yeah.
not just religious, but cultural heritage that's now being stored in France, that's now being stored in the UK, that's being stored in
Mm-hmm.
Belgium. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so how do we understand ourselves better historically, but then also understand ourselves in a more contemporary way when I guess we don't have enough of these discussions because they're not sparked at an early age?
I think the first thing is for us to understand that representation can't be the end goal. Do you know what I mean? Like us wanting to be represented and educate or taught our history in the same institutions that oppress us, right? Just doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't make sense. There have been like countless studies that shows that the more racial pride that someone has, the more pride that a person has in terms of like their history and their cultural identity and so forth, the less likely they are to be oppressed. They've done numerous studies of that, particularly in Congo during the times of like colonial oppression. There were there was essentially mandates that were like, if anyone believes that traditional ancestral beliefs, like kill them off. Because people who believed their traditional ancestral beliefs were more resistant to colonialism than those who converted to Catholicism, right? And so the people who
Mm,
educate you, like who oppress you, can't be the same people who educate you. It it's incongruent. It just doesn't make sense. Do you know what I mean? Why would you expect your abuser to help you with your homework? Like it and then to help you get good grades. Like it doesn't make sense. And so I think at some point we as a community have to have a reckoning when it comes to this thing about representation, and education and so forth, and see it as a strategy rather than the end goal. But the primary strategy has to be that we have to educate ourselves. We have to educate ourselves in our homes. We have to educate ourselves in our communities, in our families, and so forth, and in our personal lives, and to actually be proud of that. And I say that to say this and like, okay, so what does that look like? It could look like speaking your own languages. Do you know what I mean? So even like, so it's very good that you said that with the fact that you're of Igbo descent, but you don't speak Igbo. Like, okay, I'm gonna challenge you. Learn some words. Do you know what I mean? This time next year, it's like there's more resources. There's a lot of people in our community who are putting resources together for us to be able to do that didn't exist. And so it's like, okay, what can we do in our day to day, in our bit by bit? Because a lot of African languages are dying out. We live in an ever more global, and when I say global, I mean white supremacist and imperialist society. That if we're not careful, the more we buy into this, the more erasure that there's going to be of this. But we live in a time when we're able to self-determine using things like the internet more than ever and to connect with each other more than ever, but we're actually using it almost like to form new hierarchies that we exclude each other in different ways. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm seeing like black
Mm.
Americans and black British people, our first opportunity to really be able to connect and understand and learn from each other, we're beefing about like who can act and who. Like, do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
Malcolm X came from Harlem all the way to Smethwick. Bruv, I've never even been to Smethwick. Do you know what I mean? Here in the UK or Birmingham ends like and was like, nah, we gotta come together as a people. Here we are 50, so 60, 70 years later, right? And we're beefing in that way. So actually we gotta look at ourselves and say, like, okay, so what are we doing to educate ourselves? And I like to, other cultures are really interesting because if you look at Japanese culture, if you look at Chinese culture, the way that they've been able to, and obviously it's different historical legacies, absolutely, I understand that, but the way that they've been able to maintain their cultural heritage and their historical heritage, but also come into modernity has been really, really interesting. And so I say, like, in terms of like African culture, like obviously it's very diverse, but what are we doing to preserve ourselves? What do we put out there that is actually sacred? When I see stuff like, you know, memes, when people do the Hotep memes and they put the little kente hats on someone and it becomes like, and I get like, I have a sense of humor, bruv. Like, I get it. Do you know what I mean? I sometimes find it funny too. Like, I'm not going to be a hypocrite, you know? But then I think about it, no,
Yeah.
kente is a sacred cloth. Like, it's ancestral, it's traditional, you know?
Mm.
Like, that's not supposed to be happening. You know what I mean? Especially when you engage with it more in that way than you do in the traditional sacred way. What are your ancestors saying? So every day, and I was reading like, there's a writer called Patrice Malidoma Some who's from Burkina Faso, and he writes a lot about kind of like ancient tradition and spirituality and stuff. And he says this kind of concept or philosophy in terms of like how to liberate yourself from, you know, the shackles of white supremacy, right, is to imagine you're sitting in a round table of like of 12 of your ancestors. Yeah, so that could be your grandparents, anyone who's passed could be your grandparents, anyone in your own lineage, or anyone who you just look up to, right? So it could be from my grandparents to Malcolm X, for example, or whoever it is. Yeah. And imagine that, when you're having these moments of like perhaps meditation or reflection, imagine that you're sat in front of them. Like, can you justify your behaviors and the things that you do and the things that you say in front of them? Like, that's the judgment. Do you know what I mean? That's the kind of like respect and reverence that we should be having in terms of like our own growth and our own development. Because we wouldn't be here were it not for them. Like, people talk about what we're going through now. I say, bro, we're not going through nothing. Like, like, bruv, like we're actually so good. We don't realize. Yes, there is
Yeah.
there's a lot going on, but we're so good. Our parents couldn't walk down the street. Like, do you know what I mean? It's different.
Mm.
It's different. What our parents are like. My
Yeah.
grand,
I
my
feel like. if anything, what's frustrating? I was just gonna say, I feel like if
Mm.
anything, what's frustrating for us now is how close we are to actually being equal. It's like we're this close, but we're still not there. Whereas before, it was like you're not even thinking about being close.
Whew, we are so close, so close. My father, the person who brought, who was half responsible for bringing me into this world, was born under colonialism. Like he was colonized. Do you know? Like for me, that's mad. I think about my own childhood. It's like, rah, like imagine being born and you're colonized. Like, and what am I complaining about? Like, what am I thinking is impossible? You know, like my grandmother was born enslaved, basically. Do you know what I mean? Like, and we talk about this as if, and this is the thing, right? It's really interesting because we talk about slavery in terms of the diasporas, but we don't talk about slavery on the continent. Like, there were mad plantations, like on the continent, like in Congo as well. It wasn't cotton, but it was rubber. But if my ancestors were picking rubber, like, do you know what I mean? And these are the legacies
Mm,
that we're carrying. So if I'm here now and I'm looking, and these people persevered for me to be alive and doing what I'm doing now, like when we say stuff like, look at the language around it, I'm not my ancestors. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, but what do you think that
mm.
means? You know? I've never heard that from any other cultural group. Even these man whose ancestors were colonizers, they should be embarrassed to have them. Like, do you know what I mean? They don't say that.
Yeah.
Like, you should be embarrassed that
Mm,
your ancestor was a genocidal maniac. Like, but they're not embarrassed. Do you know what I mean? But we say stuff like, "Oh, I'm not my ancestors. I will." And I'm like, "What do you think that means?" And for me, it's like, "Hold on, I'm not my ancestors." Yeah, like I'm shook, bruv. My ancestors could fight. Like, do you know what I mean? Like they would, you know, like. And so it's yeah. So I really think we have to reframe the relationship of how we see ourselves, how we see our black identities, and how we see our ancestral lineage as well. And I think the most powerful thing that we can do, I say, like as black people, is connect with our ancestral lineage, connect with our histories, connect with our culture. That's the pathway to liberation. Like I feel like everything else has been tried and tested, and I think that the further that we get along, we can talk about, representation in um, in society, but as long as this society remains white supremacist and imperialistic, which it is, like it's not going to liberate us. But the more we are traditionally tied to our ancestral values, the more that we'll be able to overcome the system. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like a lot of our ancestral cultures already talks about the things that we're, obviously the positive things, but the things that we're aspiring to achieve. So yeah, it's like how do you get to? This is the thing. It's like how do you get people to see the value in that without it being reinforced in the mainstream? So it took. So look at what happened with Black Panther and the Black Panther effect, right? People see this is the thing. One minute
mm.
it was like, Kente is meme, all of this, Hotep. Black Panther comes out. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna wear my Kente to the cinema. Do you see like?
Yeah.
Do you see the shift? Right. So it's like, how do we now have that shift without it being dependent on what's being shown on the mainstream? How do I have reverence for my
Mm,
ancestral traditions and culture and actually show up proud of that without it being something that depends on a movie or some kind of pop sensation? And a quick story time, right? So one of the things that made me think, you know what, I got to be proud of who I am. I went to a basketball camp. Tell you a quick story. I went to a basketball camp when how old was I? I was a teenager. I can't remember how old now. I'm old now. My brain hurts, man. But yeah, I was a teenager, bro. Yeah, I went to a basketball camp one summer when my mum had just come back from Congo, and she bought me this kind of like traditional Congolese kind of like top and bottom matching sets. Yeah, so I had taken it to the camp with me, and obviously we were playing basketball all week, whatever, whatever, and we had like a little opportunity in the evenings to go to the mall to hang out, whatever. And one time, all the guys were hanging out in the hotel room, and then everyone came into my room, right? My suitcase was there. One of my friends went through my suitcase and was like, pulled this out, and then he was like, hey, Jay, what's this, man? And he's like, right. Everyone was, I got roasted. And I got a sense of humor. Like, I laughed. They was like,
Yeah.
it's Kunta Kinte, rah. Kunta Kinte plays basketball. But, bro, I'm not gonna lie, bro. I
Yeah.
was it was funny, but I was being roasted, but I was pissed,
Mm.
right? Because I was thinking in my head, oh man.
Yeah.
But like I was like, yo, that's a fly top, like I want to wear it. But everyone's cussing me. Oh, look, they are sending back on the boat. Kunta Kinte playing basketball, all of this kind of stuff. But I still rocked it. I was like, no, you know what? I rocked it. I don't care. Like now, fast forward 5, 10 years later, guys are coming. Oh, where you get your tops from? Where you know what I mean? I like your style, man. All
Yeah.
of this kind of stuff.
Mm.
And I'm like, hmm. So nothing's changed, but your perception. Do you know what I mean? And so if you abandon your culture, like I could have taken that experience and then been like, you know what, it's embarrassing. I'm gonna throw this away. Like it gets mocked. No, but having that sense of pride and being very lucky to have the parents that I had or grow up in the community that I grew up in and so forth. Because a lot of this stuff, like you got to thank the conscious community because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about now has been present in that community for a long time. Obviously, there's still issues regardless, but I feel like having that cultural pride is so important, right? And then, like, so I took that with me and was like, no, I'm going to be proud in who I am. Now, imagine, yeah, like you look at like Chinese culture or Japanese culture or Indian culture, etc., with the saris, or even like Arab culture and their specific dressings. Like we go to Dubai and we wear their cloth in it, and I don't say that as a bad thing. Like I'll do the same. It's reverence, like it's respecting someone's culture.
Yeah.
But then we don't do that for our own culture, you know. And so
Mm.
I always think like what are we really not just saying and discussing when it comes to blackness and black identity, but what are we really living? What pride do we have in ourselves that doesn't depend on what representation there is in the movies or in our celebrity sphere or entertainment sphere? Like, what kind of pride and cultural reverence are we showing for ourselves in our personal lives and in our homes? And I mean, yeah, I think it's a big question mark right now, isn't it? Like,
Yeah, that's something people need to go off and look for. Like people need to go off and start thinking about their own roots and where they're from and what they can connect to. Because I
mm-hmm,
understand obviously a lot of people don't necessarily have strong cultural ties to, wherever they may descend from personally.
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
I think this also ties to what
mm-hmm,
you were saying in terms of, a lot of the names of these countries are all colonial concepts. Like these are all things that were made up within the last half a century. Nigeria is only how old?
mm-hmm,
The same with Congo. A lot of these
mm-hmm,
countries,
right,
Congo, Zimbabwe, they've
right.
even changed names. And so much of this pride or nationalism that we might even feel is false. And it's something that, okay, so I'm on another podcast
Exactly.
called Travel and Turn Up, and we talk about, one thing that I find so interesting is looking at West Africa as an example. The way that the tribes go in
Mm,
terms of people, Yoruba people go like this, Fulani people go like this. You find those groups of people from Ghana, Togo,
mm,
Benin, Nigeria, and even across, and then you find
mm-hmm,
more Fulani
mm-hmm,
people elsewhere in Africa. The same with Swahili people. But when
mm,
they drew the map, they're drawing it this
mm.
way. The people are going this way vertically. I mean horizontally.
Exactly.
They're drawing the map
Exactly.
vertically. And so you're
Yeah.
actually splitting the same
Yeah.
groups of people into like four different countries. And I think that's a huge part of the
Mm-hmm.
reason why, as soon as you have independence, there's people fighting for dominance. Because you've just separated people into lots of different groups that make absolutely no sense. These people had never been unified
Exactly.
before. They were their own tribe, and now you've told them,
Mm-hmm.
okay, all of you that we've drawn this box, this is one country. You guys have to fight together. You have to be nationalistic. Your GDP is going to be drawn like this.
Right.
That's how we're going to define you. And if you guys don't get it
Mm-hmm.
together and believe what we've just told you, now you're going to be in poverty. And now you're going to be borrowing money from
Right.
us. And the legacy of so much of what has happened since then simply just comes from
Mm.
people just telling you this is your home now. This is what life looks like now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think like this is why I'm not too tied in in terms of like national borders and stuff. And I'm talking specifically in the African context because a lot of our ancestors migrated, right? And what's happening is, especially like the 23andMe and the DNA tests and so forth, it's revealing that people who who thought they were proudly of a particular nation, like realize that, oh,
Mm,
actually my lineage is not quite there, like, and so like my surname's Bola, right, or Bola. um a lot of people assume that I'm Nigerian because it's a common Nigerian surname. And what I learned was
yeah.
that, because I used to get that question all the time, and I was like, I actually need to look into this. And I looked into it around. So the history is that around the 15th century, when the Portuguese first, um, enslaved the Kingdom of Congo, there was a lot of migration of the kind of what region is now known as like northern Congo, of migration of people out upwards towards central and further and northern Africa, and leftwards towards um, West Africa and Nigeria as well, and some parts where people settled specifically. So like the Igbo lands and Yoruba lands and so forth, and there's lots of like linguistic similarities. There's a African linguist called Kwesi Pra who ties in African ethnicities and and their linguistic
Mm,
associations rather than looking at national boundaries. And so people, you might find that, yeah, you're proudly Nigerian, but actually 2 centuries ago, you were Central African, Congolese. Like, do you know what I mean? Or you might be proudly
yeah.
Senegalese, but, you know, a century ago, you were from Chad, or you were from Uganda, or you were from South
Yeah.
Sudan, you know? And this is the thing, it's like, this is why for me, ultimately, like, the goal is Pan Africanism. And I mean that in terms of like not just the continent, but also like the global diaspora. Like as black people, what are we doing to unify ourselves? Because wherever we go, like for me, is wherever we go, I see a part of myself. I've been lucky to travel to many different black communities around the world. And I say to you, when I was in Harlem and I saw no one but black people, this was pre gentrification, I just saw black people, I was like, yo, this could be Kinshasa. Like, do you know what I mean? When I was in Lagos and I was like, this could
Mm,
be Kinshasa. Like I was in Burkina Faso, like it's, not to make black people a monolith, but I'm saying like I see myself in my people. I have that pride of my people wherever I go, and I can blend in terms of the cultures and still feel proud that this culture has existed, rather than making it a sense of like exclusivity thing. And so
mm.
yeah, I think we need to like work on having that connection and bringing back those values, and that's why like I really rate like how
I
things
think.
used to be. I think we need to
Mm.
kind of go back into that.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is also having pride in that, and
Mm,
pride in the fact that maybe you're not from where you thought you were from, and that can be a good thing because I find it so interesting how, as African or Afro descendant people, we
mm,
feel like we have to be from the place that we were from, and that's it.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Whereas you see how happy English people get when they find out that their grandfather was 1/8 Italian,
Right,
or they have a little bit of Spanish somewhere here back in the day,
right.
or they have a little bit of this, their grand auntie was Japanese. And so I find it interesting how, other people are allowed to,
Mm,
they don't, as much as they might love their country and they feel this strong nationalistic pride, they also
mm,
allow themselves on an identity level to find affinity in other cultures. And so suddenly you
mm-hmm.
have these people. I think even America is a great example of this, where people are historically Italian American. I've never been to Italy.
Right, right.
There's nothing like right now that's tying you there.
Yeah,
But you're gonna
yeah,
learn some Italian. You're gonna learn about this culture. You're gonna embrace it in a very different way. And I think that's something
yeah.
I would love
Mm-hmm.
to see more within our community as well.
Yeah.
Maybe not just even from Africa, but I guess Pan African as well, and looking around the diaspora and looking at what
Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
can embrace about each other and looking at how we can find a collective identity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it's slowly starting to happen, but like we're coming from a place of where formerly it was the previous. It was the opposite, right? In the sense that, in a lot of our communities, if you had a non-white person in your ancestry somewhere, it's like, what? I'm 5% European. Oh my gosh! And people suddenly start calling themselves mixed. Do you know what I mean? Like, or people, will have like
Yeah.
one Native American great grandparent, and they'll be like, oh yes, I'm also this, and I'm like, you're
Yeah.
almost you're. It's like and it's anti-blackness, right? You're trying to remove yourself from your blackness in the same way that a white person would try to
Mm.
claim another white ethnicity to, kind of mix themselves up a little bit. But I think that so many good things are happening, but they're just not really being spoken about. And if we look at like Ghana, for instance, and the year of return, and how that kind of made so many young black diaspora particularly look at going home and been home and reconnecting with their cultures. Like we really need to open up, because I think what I think that could be a massive change, but then you're going to find that a lot of people are going to feel left behind, because there's going to be people who are further on the outside who are going to come back, who are going to learn your
Mm.
languages, even I'm saying even non-black people, like white people, whatever. I'm seeing Tunisians, I'm seeing Lebanese who are going, I'm seeing Chinese who are going back to Congo, right? Learning Lingala, setting up businesses, and then selling back to me.
Yeah.
Fam, sorry man, why I'm like, if they can learn Lingala, I
Yeah.
can, like, do you know what I mean? Just to make money. They're doing it just to
Mm.
make money. But I'm thinking about, this is my cultural pride, this is my ancestral pride, this is my heritage, and I'm embarrassed about it. Do like there's a lot of
Yeah.
psychological reframing that we need to do. White supremacy did a, a monster on us, like it did a number on us. It's a very efficient system. Like I can't even hate. Like it's mad. I genuinely can't even hate. Like as a system of oppression, fucking hell, like it works perfectly. How do you get to making people hate
Yeah.
themselves so much, right? That you can leave the
Mm.
room and they continue to hate themselves. You know, like it's insane. Like some of the biggest, some of the places in the world where white supremacy is so deeply entrenched is in the places where there's absolutely no white people.
Yeah.
Like Congo is one of the darkest places. Like South Sudan is one of the people that has the darkest skin. But you know what? White supremacy is rife. Why am I in my own country and people are embarrassed to speak their own languages? Like,
Mm.
or you get looked down upon if you wear your own cultural costume or your own cultural attire. But if you wear a suit or a shirt, then, you know, I'm seeing people in Congo, and I'm speaking specifically of the Congolese community here, who will turn up to weddings in a sari. Like, how does that make sense? Like, are they wearing kitambalas in India? I don't think so. I've been to India. I've not seen anyone in Congolese attire in India. I've not seen it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I think we really have to
That's
ask
true.
ourselves
And it's
in
it's interesting how.
mm,
Mm. Also, I was just gonna say it's interesting how our legacy is so different because
yeah,
Indian people lived through colonialism. Like even between Japan and China, there's colonialism. There's
right.
colonialism within so many other cultures, but it's
Mm-hmm,
so interesting how they were able to regain their identity, their cultural
mm-hmm,
identity.
mm-hmm,
Chinese people still embrace Chinese identity. Japanese people
mm-hmm,
still embrace Japanese identity. Indian
mm-hmm,
people have their own identity, and that's what they embrace. But then
mm-hmm.
everyone else, we want some of everyone's because sometimes we're not comfortable
Yeah,
enough in our own.
exactly. And I think, like, I mean, that's the thing with anti-blackness is this hierarchy of race and the way that we are racialized. It really reflected that it's like what Andre 3000 says, you know, why is it that everywhere in the world people with the darkest skin suffers the most, right? And I think that's
Mm,
such a profound statement, because it's not just people with the darkest skin, because there's mad dark skinned people in India, bro. Like, fam, you know what? Even just a slight tangent. I went to India. I saw a man darker than me who was shook of me. Like, I'm like, bro, we are both
Yeah.
like, okay, I understand you're not racially black, but you are dark as me, bro. Why are you scared of me? Like, do you know what I mean? And then when a white guy comes along, suddenly they're like,
Mm,
oh, they're running to them, and I'm like, ah. So it's the impacts of and legacies of white supremacy. That people with the darkest skin, um, were placed at the bottom of the racial hierarchy, but also people who had specific Afrocentric features. Do you know what I mean? And there were certain stigmas associated with having those
mm,
features, whether it's genetic features or phenotypes and so forth. And when we look at like sexualization, when we look at aggression, when we look at all those things, those are legacies of slavery and colonialism. And so I always say, like, in the decisions and the choices that you're making, are you reinforcing anti blackness? Are you reinforcing legacies of slavery and colonialism, or are you moving away from it? And you know we don't live in absolutes. It's a nuanced conversation. Like, I'm living here, I'm wearing a jumper, whatever. I'm speaking in English. Cool. There's certain things, I'm working here. There's certain things that we just have to accept, that we can't change it all at once. But like, what are we working towards? At least what are we aware of? And I feel like so much of the times we're not really kind of like aware of a lot of stuff, man. you know
mm. I've loved this conversation, man. It's been so
Bruv,
so good. I feel like we could talk about this for
honestly,
hours because there's so much.
I appreciate you, man. I haven't had this much energy for a while, like, so yeah, man. It's been fun, bro. It's been fun.
No, it's been great. I'm so grateful for you coming on, man. It's been really good.
Nah, thank you.
So I guess okay, before we go, maybe you could tell people. I know you've just written Mask Off, that's being republished in so many different languages. What's coming
Mm.
up next for you? What are you working on at the moment? And then where can people find you?
Um, so where can people find me? I am JJ underscore Bola or jjbola.com across like the interwebs. And I, in terms of what I'm working on next, so I've got a second novel. So my second novel is being published in October. It's coming out in the UK, US, and Brazil. And it's about a young black man who makes the decision to take his life savings and blow it all, and then at the end of it, he's gonna end his life. So it kind of like explores that journey of existentialism, mental health,
Mm.
and materialism, and all of that. Yeah, so that's my next. That's the next thing that's coming up. So hopefully I'll be able to share that soon. Yeah, appreciate you, man, and thank you for having me, man.